I'm having, there we go. These have been great talks this afternoon. So I really enjoyed the 0-day and the router, really enjoyed the ICS talk, and I really enjoyed the 0-day talk. My background, I've really worked in 3 places. I worked for a company called Internet Security Systems, where I built one of the first vulnerability research teams called the X-Force. It's actually still in existence today and highly led forward by IBM as kind of one of their anchors of their security business. Subsequent to that, I founded a company in my basement called Endgame Systems. So that was me, myself, and 2 other guys, and we grew up to about 150 people, and it's doing well today. And I took some time off to explore something else that I'm passionate about, which I see a more and more a larger intersection of today, which is exciting to me, which is radio frequency hacking and computer hacking. And so I'm an amateur radio operator and consider myself a computer hacker. My first computer I broke into was in 1984 using an IBM Model 5150, and this was my first laptop, which was used thermal printing paper, which I bought when I was 13 years old. So I've been into this and passionate about it for quite a long time, and I was always interested in exploring the radio spectrum as well. And so we're in this really unique position today with the Internet of Things, and I think there's a giant security gap being missed with the wireless exposure that we see or don't see today with the massive amount of emitters that are just infiltrating our airspace. So I'm building a new company. I'm obviously not pitching my company, but what we're looking at, the numbers from Cisco and Gartner are about 50 billion devices connected to the Internet of Things by 2020. If you compare that to the growth of the human population, there are 300,000 new human births per day versus 15 million new computers attached to the network every day. So if you want to start talking about when machine intelligence exceeds human intelligence, it's something I think reasonable to start thinking about, but I don't want to get too sci-fi. So as one of the older guys here, I am going to take a moment and kind of go through how I think we are repeating a bit of history. I loved the quote, and will be from the router hack today of send your bugs back to the 90s, because that's really the situation that we're in, and especially when you look at the wireless exposure side, and I'll show you some toys and tools and things that we're using to hack wireless today. So this is Chris Rouland's History of Information Security. So in the 1970s, we saw Captain Crunch discovered with a whistle he could take over telephone systems and make long-distance calls. This was really an enabler for guys like me, because calling long distance was really expensive. If you want to dial on a computer, Mom got really mad with a $1,000 phone bill, so we had to figure out how to call long distance for free. So phone phreaking was really an enabler to hackers organizing and getting together, whether it be on bulletin boards, whether it be through X25 networks. It was also really when computer hacking became illegal. In the United States, it wasn't until 1988 with the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. We saw the first really two, we saw one for-profit computer crime, which was Kevin Poulsen. Kevin's now a very famous journalist. His crime was gaming a radio station call-in system. And back then, the radio stations would have a call-in. If you were caller number 101, you would win a prize. In this case, there was a radio station that gave out Porsches when you were the right caller number. And so he happened to win a couple Porsches, and someone caught on that perhaps he was gaming the system, and he lost his Porsche 944S and did a little time. But honestly, my personal opinion is I think that's a bit of a victimless crime. They were giving away the car randomly anyway. and then Robert Morris with the Morris worm. Obviously, that was kind of the first really kind of cataclysmal impact we saw on the internet that made people start thinking about security. I think we didn't really feel that impact again until the Melissa virus hit later on. Melissa much different than Michelangelo. We began to see remote exploitation though in the 1990s. And the key enabler to remote exploitation was a technology I'll go through shortly, but it was basically packet sniffing, and I'll go into it in some depth and how that applies to where we are with current technology in the radio spectrum, and how it puts us right back in square in, I think, I'd say about 1994 in my opinion, which I think is a great opportunity for the InfoSec community to create a bunch of new technologies, both exploitative and defensive, and I love both sides of the equation. 2000s, we started to see big attacks, but really it was started to be the early kind of commercialization of computer fraud. But we saw big events like SQL Slammer, Code Red, attacks on social media like MySpace, and the beginning of the development of the smartphone. Today, really, whether or not you want to call it cyber war, but we've got much more serious cyber physical attacks going on, which were extremely well described this afternoon, and really the commercialization of the criminal activity on the internet, much more malicious, and in some cases existential for companies, where companies can truly go out of business now in 2015 if they're badly compromised. By 2020, I see us in a place where IoT is completely taken over. Our devices, I'll mix the term emitters with devices. I really see an IoT. IoT is a broad marketing term for M2M, ICS, really anything that's connected, and mostly connected without Ethernet or without Wi-Fi. So going back old school again, this was what the internet looked like in the 90s. It was ugly. Imagine a world where IPX, SPX won, right? We would be, I don't know, we would probably be, like, the planet would be different, like if TCP/IP hadn't won. But back in those days, you had to know all these networks. I mean, imagine, I don't know, it's really kind of white hair talk, but I remember connecting Apple Talk networks to CC Mail and Novell and trying to print through them. It was a complete freaking nightmare. And I have Gopher up here. I'm somewhat fond of Gopher D because I deployed some of the very early internet sites, including Senate.gov. And when I installed Senate.gov, I said, do you want a web server? They said, no, we just want a Gopher server. I said, there's this web thing here. Do you really want to try it? And Senator Kennedy was forward looking. He said, yeah, I'll go ahead and put up a web server. I'm like, all right, www.senate.gov. So that was one of the first web servers I ever installed on the internet. I was very young, obviously. But anyway, so as we were finding our way across these different protocols, fortunately this one won. But if you look at the IoT today, we're in a much different situation, much worse situation than we were 20 years ago. But I want to go back to why in the mid-90s we saw a revolution in exploitation. Someone from my company found this much older picture of me, probably when I was using one of these. And so early in my career, sniffing packets was like magic, right? It was like only a few people had access to the sniffer, and they were extremely expensive. And all it was a compact lunchbox computer with a special network interface card from a company called Network General, which later became McAfee. And it truly shows that the guys who made the sniffer became one of the biggest cybersecurity companies. Is that being able to see traffic and see packets on the network are absolutely critical to having visibility into that. And two things changed in the mid-90s. One is, fortunately, tools, open source tools, and Sun started shipping things like Snoop. TCP dump was really a game changer. We had the some like really good early promiscuous mode device drivers for for the BSD platforms. And so everyone got to see network traffic, not just people who could afford $25,000 sniffers. And once everyone could see network traffic, then we started to begin to reverse engineer and decode those protocols. And as we decoded those protocols, we found all kinds of vulnerabilities. So the 90s was just a heyday of finding bugs in 0 days. Just as your talk was today with IoT devices on the IP side with a network card, let alone when you get to looking at this next generation of over 100 different wireless protocols that are all developed without eyes on them. And so anyway, that really gave birth to the access to the span port, the ability to sniff packets, gave birth to the modern cybersecurity industry. If you look at any billion-dollar cybersecurity company today, almost all of them have one thing in common. They need access to the span port. And so my thesis is to secure the IoT, both to find vulnerabilities in it and to secure it, we're going to have to be able to see our airspace. And the amount of information that is going across the spectrum and through the air right now in this room, even I was looking earlier, is staggering, and really no one's been looking at it until recently because the technology to do so was far more expensive than that. So if you look at where we are now, this is just some of them, and these are really small fonts. It's hard to read, obviously. RFID is way down here on the spectrum. I don't really consider that. It's just part of IoT. But if you move up to ANT, NFC, Zigbee, Z-Wave, Bluetooth I'll pick on quite a bit. New protocol that's coming out next year is 802.11ah. I don't know if you know are you familiar with that? So 802.11ah is a 900 megahertz ISM band long-range Wi-Fi. So imagine now we've got a new Wi-Fi that no one can see that's very long range. So that's going to be an interesting, I think we'll see a lot of 802.11ah hacks in 2016. But this threat surface with all these different physical file layer Wi-Fi protocols, as well as the software layer protocols on top of them, looks way worse than the slide I showed you with Novell and Sun and TCP/IP. And so what we've got competing protocols for the industrial control protocols, consumer protocols, and even some voice. DECT has been picked on for years. We picked on DECT at the last, we had two hot talks at Hack in the Box in Amsterdam. One of them was on DECT, and one of them was just around software-defined radios, which is the core of our technology. Anyway, the point is, in '94 we had to deal with maybe 10 protocols on the network, and fiber, token ring, Ethernet, a couple coaxial Ethernet. Someone had this brilliant idea to make 10BASE-T Ethernet. They did very well. It's much worse today, and conversely, it gives us a much greater opportunity. And so the game changer was in my opinion, was this guy. I don't know if anyone knows who he is. His name's Eric Fry. I've always had a hard time with name recognition. One of my sales guys said, think of tie a name to a word. So I said, okay, fried egg. Now I'll never forget his name, Eric Fry. So Eric Fry found this device called an RTL 2832, and there have been several iterations on that device. They've gotten really small now. This is one right here. And it's designed for DVB TV reception. So it's designed for digital video broadcast television reception. This one was about $6. And the frequency, what he did was turn it into what's called a software-defined radio, or effectively a packet sniffer for the airwaves. These you've probably heard in the US press. We've had quite a bit of drama about being spied on by our government, having our cell phones intercepted, randomly. Rogue cell towers, I'll talk about some in more depth, but basically this up until a few years ago, this was equipment that was only available to nation states. So not unlike, say, GPS. GPS was deployed in the 1950s, but was really only available to the consumer until the late 90s. This technology has been in use by multiple governments, I'm sure, for decades at the cost of billions of dollars. But all of a sudden, a few hackers got together, and not only Eric Fry, but Michael Ossman with HackRF, Matt Edis, Edis Research, another company called Nuond. These are kind of the three big players in the software-defined radio space, which is still somewhat reminiscent to me of kind of like building a Heathkit computer or powering up an Apple II and looking at it and having a basic prompt and there's nothing there. And so I really see software-defined radios as the next big thing that has not happened yet. And so all of a sudden, so this one, the RTL is probably sort of religious war. I think it's a bit of a toy. These allow you to do quite a bit more and allow you to transmit and receive. So imagine now the ability to inject packets through the airwaves at these frequencies. Obviously, in accordance with state and local legislation, because there are a lot of different laws where you are in the world, and some places it's not criminal. You just get sent a fine. It's the location of the transmitter. You have to be very careful. So, for instance, in my company, I've got 5 PhDs in software-defined radios. And we keep a lot of their work in Faraday cages because the way in the United States it works, if you transmit on a band too hard, you get a fine. So you have to be very careful that if you do transmit, that you do so safely and legally. The couple of examples here of kind of SDR hacks. This is one of my guys. His name's Logan Lamb. He it's the new trend going back to Cisco Gate in 2005 at Black Hat. Logan Lamb is a researcher who works for me, and prior to had worked for Oak Ridge National Labs. Anyway, when he was there, he found very serious vulnerabilities in almost all wireless home alarm systems, in that while they have the ability to detect jamming, they basically are they're too lazy or don't want to use the battery power to detect jamming. And it's very simple to jam 433 megahertz and 315 megahertz home alarm systems. So he went on a television show, very popular in the United States. It's probably one of the most popular TV shows in the US, called Good Morning America, and demonstrated from the back of a van how to bypass an alarm system, and they walked right in the front door. This was right around Christmas. And the vendors got the message because ADT, which is one of the largest alarm companies in the US, got slapped with an 8-figure class action lawsuit. It just seems a bit egregious to me, but certainly I think we'll get their attention and say, wow, if I'm in the security business and my sensors can be jammed with a $6 chip on Amazon and a 9-volt battery, perhaps I need to turn on my anti-jamming measures. This was a great example at ShmooCon a couple years ago, using one of these radios, a USRP, where this guy just went ahead and disregarded the FCC regs, because ShmooCon, if you're not familiar with it, is a largely U.S. government spook-attended conference. So he just went ahead and took over all our cell phones in the room. So rogue cell towers certainly have become in vogue. So I didn't want to count on the demo gods today. So I don't know if anyone knows what this is. I captured this in here this morning. So this is at, I think it's 859.6 megahertz. This is the LTE control channel that I'm receiving in this room, and these are other LTE data channels. So I was watching our LTE traffic inside this room, and I was actually doing that with this little $6 guy. So this is the more expensive one. I have a little kit, so it's all branded with my company name on it. For our vulnerability researchers, I give them a kit with all kinds of tools or toys for hacking RF. This is this radio covers from 50 megahertz to 6 gigahertz of transmit and receive continuously. It's a good one in the tool set. This is the USRP. Another, I think, important tool in the IoT hackers tool set is a Ubertooth. If you can get them, I think there's a new one coming out, but the Ubertooth is a fantastic tool for Bluetooth hacking. I was collecting a lot of Bluetooth data in here today. I might process it tonight, see what I found. I certainly turned my Bluetooth off before I came in here. I was curious how many of you guys, this seems like a friendlier conference than, say, DEF CON, where everyone's hacking each other, but I was still turned off my Bluetooth and ran through VPN. Another good tool, as I get into this protocol, is called the Killer Bee. It's a firmware update for a very inexpensive Z-Wave, Zigbee USB dongle, and allows you to scan for Z-Wave. Zigbee, I'll talk through some specific use cases. Zigbee just cries 1990 security, though, when we talk through the vulnerabilities. And then finally, a slightly beefed up version of the RTL, pretty popular product called the AirSpy. Another great, cool. So this is in my bag that is tagged my RF kit. Make sure you have the right antennas and connectors though too, because that helps. This is another example. Does anybody want to guess what that is? Know what that frequency is? So that's the Bluetooth channel 39, and we can see here I'm centered on 2441, which is channel 39, observing kind of the ups and downs of data transmission in this room. So clearly we had a lot of Bluetooth activity here. So this is one of my favorite SDR hacks, and he now works for me. The ISW3 was launched in 1978. It was the first spacecraft in the world to fly by a comet, and it was decommissioned in 1995. NASA decided they would never be able to talk to it again, and why bother fooling with it? It's gone. It's a write down. And a group of hackers figured out it had actually come back close enough into orbit that they could talk to it, and they wanted to reboot it. And they talked to NASA, and NASA said, well, we hauled off all those radios, 20 years ago. They're gone. And these guys said, no, we don't need radios. We don't need the radios to hack that satellite. We can reboot the satellite. It'd be nice if you gave us the protocol spec, but regardless. So NASA provided the protocol spec. And the deal was between the hackers and NASA was that if we can reboot this satellite and fire the thrusters to get it lined up correctly, that you'll donate it for K-12 STEM education, which is like a really great, feel good, like that's just a really cool project. And they actually talked to it, they rebooted it, and they got to fire the thrusters. They didn't get it exactly where they wanted it, but the fact that we were able to actually use this exact little $600 radio to reboot a 40-year-old satellite is absolutely amazing. So one thing it leads me to believe is that they didn't need permission to reboot the satellite. So space communications equipment is, especially older stuff, you can imagine there wasn't a lot of security on it in 1978. So what is up there that is vulnerable to reboot with one of these, I think is very interesting, and I think there'll be some interesting work around exploitation of older spacecraft using SDRs. I certainly don't endorse it, but I was just up at Virginia Tech actually, and they have an incredible ground station that's tracking every known spacecraft out there. Apparently, there's only one country kind of doesn't play by the rules on the radio frequencies that they use for their spacecraft. But this was a really kind of the ultimate hack to me of combining computer software hacking and this new enabling technology. Some observations out of Black Hat. Black Hat this year and DEF CON this year really was about a third about hacking things. A really interesting exploit was called Fontana. They basically uploaded a firmware onto a printer, and the printer began modulating data at a frequency low enough to get on an AM band to get it through a 2-foot concrete bunker wall. So they were able to turn a printer into an emitter or backdoor node on a network and then receive the transmission by SDR. Obviously low bandwidth, but was extremely innovative. This was in 2010. I think we have seen this. We've seen this showing up in the wild. We've seen it in the United States. We've seen it in the wild, and we've seen our own government using it against us. We recently saw it in Norway outside of Parliament and several officials' houses, which were rogue cell towers. And notable, if you do experiment with one of these, when you force a cell phone down to GSM or 2G, I've not seen a modern one that actually says 2G. It still says LTE or 3G PPE on it. And so when your mobile device gets forced down, you frequently don't know that. And really, a lot of the world depends on cellular secondary authentication now. So imagine an attacker with a backpack with a rogue cell tower who is nearby you and forces a password reset and intercepts the text message that you get for the secondary authentication. And so, for a couple $100 now, we can completely bypass secondary auth. I forgot we had a guy who couldn't come here today. He was supposed to get 3 on. He was the camera guy. ProxyHam was the drama this year at DEF CON. My guy Logan Lamb was last year. ProxyHam was a really simple idea. It was basically a commercial product from a company called Ubiquiti that allowed a hacker to tunnel Wi-Fi over 900 megahertz to another receiver a couple miles away to disavow his location. My take on that is you're going to be able to do that with the new Wi-Fi protocols coming out pretty soon anyway. But it's a couple $100 worth of equipment. But what it shows is that I think enterprises are going to have to be looking at all their airwaves, not just the 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz bands, which is all they can see today. This was pretty cool. This got hacked in the IoT Village live. So Samsung donated this fridge, and I saw one IoT Village t-shirt today. It was pretty cool. I camped out there and hung out the whole time. So this new Samsung fridge, I'm not sure exactly why. It logs into your Google account, and it has an SSL certificate on it that it chose to ignore. And login credentials were accessible to anybody via Wi-Fi. So when your company, companies like Twitter, big enterprises are running their corporations on Google Docs, all right, and your refrigerator has your login. This is going from a refrigerator to corporate secrets is not a giant gap anymore. And it seems like every week we're seeing another IoT manufacturer who embeds or loses a certificate. And I don't know. I think the devices are being made at such a high rate that they're being made faster than they can possibly be secured. There's no way you can install 15 million devices on the internet. In 1994, there were 1 million nodes on the internet. Now we're adding 15 times that per day. It ain't gonna happen securely. Global Star. I'm actually a Global Star user. This was really interesting. This was another IoT hack that came out this year. Globalstar is a low-cost satellite network. It does have pretty much full global coverage now. They went through some iterations, bankruptcy, if you've ever seen. They have a phone that I have. They've got a product called the Spot, which is a global locator. It's like if you're hiking or backpacking, you have an emergency, you can hit this device and it'll send a beacon out to where your location is. It's also used on almost every armored car, at least in the United States, and they use them to track the routes. And if they go off the route, they notify that there's a problem, there's a security problem. Obviously, the armored car is off the route. Well, using one of these things, this really sharp researcher who's also an amateur radio operator was able. They operated at extremely high frequency, built a down converter, and determined that this device that's securing these armored cars, notifying you where you are when you get caught in an avalanche, is actually transmitting your GPS locations over HTTP, like no S. This is 2015, okay? And they're not even using SSL. Now accidentally missing your certificate is one thing, but not even implementing HTTP over HTTPS is just kind of mind-blowing, and I think it shows you the state of insecurity these devices are out here. This is one of my favorite talks I've ever seen, was by these two really brilliant Italians. Spoke I think 2014 Hack in the Box 14 yeah these guys were awesome. If you were there, they got on stage dressed up like sailors, and so this is the very low end of the spectrum at the VHF 140. Yes, yeah, that was an awesome talk. I talk about it all the time still. So this is what the 144, 146 megahertz or so frequency range. So at the very low end of the spectrum, and I would put these AIS systems as nodes on the IoT, just like the ADBS airplane tracking systems are up at 1090 megahertz. I think all these things are become connected now with the enabler of equipment that allows us to all talk to them. And so they discovered that they could fire the man overboard sensor, override the autopilot. It was totally insecure. There's a really easy way to secure it, which is have a sensor on a ship that says, hey, you know what? There's a new emitter that's transmitting VHF, and it's really strong, and it kind of came out of nowhere. But I kind of refer to this as like the Somali pirate's toolkit, right? Imagine if you're a pirate and you actually could fire a man overboard sensor. You could force your collision chains of a ship. So this was a fantastic talk on the low end that again uses technology, and we see this more and more. I think at Black Hat Asia last year, probably a quarter of the talks were using SDRs for hacking. Yeah, I think I talked about GSM enough. I'll go through that. Want to talk about rogue cell towers. The Wi-Fi proxy attack I thought was interesting, but what I think will become Wi-Fi. We've got a couple issues with Wi-Fi. One is it's really for the IoT. It takes too much energy for a wearable or embeddable. We're looking at protocols. We don't have my old protocol, my big protocol slide there. There was one in there called InOcean that has, 10 to 20 year device lives for their sensors with no batteries or very light batteries. And so protocols like Wi-Fi are just simply too much of energy hogs, and most IoT devices don't need a gigabit of bandwidth. They just need a couple hundred kilobits maybe tops, or even a couple hundred bits. In the case of InOcean, it's about 111 bits per second. In some sensors, that's really all they need. But I do think the new Wi-Fi protocols coming out in the 900 megahertz and 400 megahertz spectrum are going to be a real issue, especially in enterprise, because they have today, again, the enterprise, they've got no packet sniffer to see the stuff going out, and that's got to be developed. Bluetooth is constantly being beat up. I was beating it up today. really, if you back up and look at what Bluetooth was designed for, Bluetooth was really just designed to replace cables for kind of short-term synchronization. It wasn't designed to become the mesh network of the IoT. And not only are there weaknesses in Bluetooth and BTLE, there more so in the older protocols, but again, we see those out there living. I did an assessment of a data center recently, and in the data center, the KVM for the mainframe was running an antique version of Bluetooth that allowed for impersonation attack of the keyboard. So you literally, have root on the console, simply with a Bluetooth impersonation attack. And the point was not so much, okay, wow, that's a big deal, it's a Bluetooth attack. It's, we don't have any Bluetooth in here. It reminded me of the early 2000 discussions with security officers saying, we don't have any Wi-Fi, there's a Wi-Fi policy, no Wi-Fi allowed, except that everybody had it under their desk and was hiding it anyway. And so the ability, I think, to detect and scan for this stuff in the enterprise will become critical. Okay, this is one of my favorites to beat up on, Zigbee. This is a great talk on so there are two really big, both ICS and home automation protocols, Zigbee and Z-Wave, both of which were developed in a vacuum, proprietary standards. Zigbee has a master key, and you only allowed to have the master key if you join the Zigbee Alliance. It's of course on my Twitter if you want to search it. I tweeted it because it's embedded into every Zigbee device. If you want to join it, it's a fallback key. And so there are two default passwords for Zigbee because they're embedded into every light bulb. And there's no place on a light bulb to change the password. And so hopefully these newer, more open standard protocols with some peer review on them will add more security. Conversely, Zigbee's been deployed in some places 10 years. We were looking at another data center, and we said, wow, you've got Zigbee, and it's like beaconing out to pair with me with a default password. I said, what? I don't even know what Zigbee is. And we said, well, let us come out. Well, we need to really find exactly what it's coming from. Well, it was coming off their chillers. And if you know what a chiller is, it's basically what keeps the data center cool. So the chillers in this data center were beaconing out by default Zigbee, saying, please pair with me, please log into me by default. And the chillers happened to be against a wall, which was against a parking lot that had no security. So any attacker could just drive right up, point a little Yagi antenna right at the wall, and log into and disable the chilling system in the data center, which is basically does not have all those great protocols in the ICS protocols do to keep themselves from blowing up. You can literally just turn off the air conditioning. And so Z-Wave has just really starting to see scrutiny in about 2014 was the first time someone's really reversed the protocol. And Z-Wave also was developed. Z-Wave runs at Zigbee runs in the higher frequencies in the 2.4 ISM band. Z-Wave's at about 906 megahertz. So again, you need to have that spectrum, that broader spectrum, to be able to inspect these protocols. I think both of these are feature-rich. Just target-rich environments. If you're a vulnerability researcher, I think you could just fuzz these protocols and tear them up. I'll tell you, going back to, I won't name the vendor because we haven't gone through disclosure yet, but we have bricked more devices than not when we send malformed packets. So when we implemented the protocol stack and send malformed packets, this stuff is just bricked. And this is just small stuff. I can't imagine what happens if you brick a chiller in a data center. This now is an existential problem. I expect we'll see the same amount of Z-Wave. We just need a broader community looking at this stuff, and I think we're at that groundswell, and I see that snowball effect happening now. Yeah, this was light bulb react. There was the bash bug showed up in some light bulbs that actually had Wi-Fi, but Philips Hue's is susceptible to bricking. Someone else discovered as well, and so while one or two at a time I think doesn't matter, when you're talking about smart cities that have entirely intelligent lighting and you can turn lights off for the entire city, or brick them, you got a serious problem if you brick all the street lights in the city. And a lot of cities are deploying all of these protocols today with protocol stacks that are totally uninspected. So I fully expect we'll see some kind of mass, like TourCon's happening in San Diego, and San Diego is rolling out their new smart lighting system at the same time. Like, something's got to happen. I mean, it's just imminent that we'll see an overlap there. Wearables. Obviously, one of the biggest parts, I think, of the IoT, fastest growing ones. There have been several really great assessments done with the top 10 of them. They're all exploitable. They all leak out information. They'll all let you pair with them. They'll all give off the credentials. I didn't wear mine down here for that reason. I personally think the only solution today is just register them in a fake name, because I don't know of any other way to secure them. There are going to be some other implications, I believe, around privacy, and so one thing we're seeing in me as an entrepreneur on my third startup, this is really cool. Our healthcare is very expensive in the U.S., but they give you a discount if you give your employees wearables. Okay, now so who's responsible if their wearable data is stolen? Am I responsible for that? Is it the healthcare provider? Is it Fitbit? I don't know. Additionally, I think more on the privacy side that falls into Chris Lovejoy's discussion this morning is what you're giving up. I don't know if any of you have actually read the end user license agreement of a wearable. I actually had my lawyer read it for me, and he confirmed that yes, indeed, that data belongs to them. It is not your data. When you strap that thing on, you are the product, and you are exploitable, and you don't own your data. So it's and you're typically running right now Bluetooth Low Energy, which has got some pretty good attacks against it. There's a really great attack on the Nest that I liked at Black Hat, which was it was a physical attack. So basically, it was just popping the top off and slipping a USB in with your own firmware, and then enabling the multi-protocol radio. So it's got a Zigbee transmitter as well as Z-Wave in there. So now all of a sudden, you've got a pivot point onto your network that you don't know about. So like that whole episode of Mr. Robot with him having to screw those wires in was a lot harder than it really needed it to be if they just had some modern thermostats. And so I do think we'll see, I don't know if you guys have heard of Cyber Barbie, the new Barbie doll that's coming out this Christmas. It's a IoT connected Barbie doll that has tens of thousands of, it's kind of like Siri for Barbie. Barbie is part of the kill chain now. So you send your victim CEO's daughter a cyber Barbie, and next thing with some malcode on there, and next thing you know, you're in the kill chain. You're pairing with his Samsung fridge, his Bluetooth. You've got his credentials. You're on net, and so this is the new normal. Oddly enough, if you look at these dolls. They all have one or two companies making the same firmware for them, and I seriously doubt there any code on what's going on there. So good opportunity for some 0 days there. Someone's got to feel free to rip off cyber Barbie kill chain. I really want to see that show up somewhere. Smart TVs, from a privacy perspective and from a vulnerability perspective. We've seen some pretty serious theoretical issues there. We haven't seen, I don't think, any real-time stuff. I've been surprised at some of the other manufacturers that haven't been beaten up. I've got a bunch of smart TVs, and I kind of buy one of each one and play around with the OSs they're running, and some of them even run really old versions of Ubuntu, which is pretty surprising. The home locks, there are a couple issues around the home locks. The simplest one is that they're really easy to pick with a regular lockpick set. And so most hacks against smart locks end up in, actually it's really just a lot easier just to pick the lock. Regardless of that, if you had a Medco cylinder in there, we've had, I don't know, August Lock, for instance, is one of the bigger ones. They had to send out an alert before iOS 9 came out saying, don't install iOS 9 or you won't be able to go into your house. So, I mean, that's kind of a serious problem. Like, what if you accidentally updated and you couldn't get into your home? Conversely, these guys are running protocols like Zigbee and Z-Wave, certainly exploitable, potentially brickable, and we've seen multiple vulnerabilities and exploits on these guys, and we'll continue to. I kind of drained the swamp on my data center talk earlier, but you know I've become really very interested in the types of emitters that exist in data centers. I was just talking to Fish earlier about the Nordic chip. The Nordic chip is the chip that's in every kind of Logitech and wireless, Microsoft wireless keyboard and mouse set, and it's kind of up to them to implement encryption, which is not a good thing, because some people do it well and some people don't do it at all. And we were recently in a data center and saw a lot of this wireless traffic. And since we know it's insecure, you know, we need to figure out, you know, is it a KVM? What is it? I suspect it's wireless KVMs, but I haven't dug into it enough yet. The cameras, as we know from our 3 o'clock today, are being hacked. Not just over. We had a great case in the U.S. with the Federal Trade Commission. I attended an IoT security event. It's funny, we're starting to see like IoT security wasn't even a term a year ago. Now there's an IoT security conference every month. And this one, the deputy chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission was there, and she actually used a great term. She said, we need to have a legislative scalpel, not a hammer, for this. But they actually did. They went after some of the baby monitor guys who had just egregious vulnerabilities in their software. And so in the US, we're going to see the Federal Trade Commission going after companies. And we saw this with Snapchat. There was a very large settlement for the snapping when they left a symmetric key in their software when they're claiming to secure all these pictures. And so I am encouraged on the cybersecurity perspective that, you know, there will be financial penalties for companies that make egregious errors. I don't think, you know, I think everybody is going to make mistakes and have bugs. You've got to innovate, but you know, what you illustrated earlier were just egregious Stack Overflows. Ignoring your SSL certs is egregious. And then conversely, it's odd having done my first vulnerability disclosure was a root in Artist and SunOS in 1991. So that was my first cert advisory. So basically 24 years of vulnerability disclosures. It seems like, again, it's 1994 where these manufacturers are reacting legally as opposed to handling responsible disclosure as we've been accustomed to with software vendors. You know, we had to educate Microsoft, we had to educate the other vendors, but now these people who make things, not software per se, don't know how to handle it when they're hacked. I would encourage you to be brave and worry about getting sued later and get out there and get your bugs out. DECT's been beat up quite a bit, but SDRs and the access to the spectrum really revisit the DECT protocol, especially in probably in this part of the world where we have a lot of call centers. We've seen a lot of concerns because it is so easy to impersonate a DECT base station, and you can do so using a software-defined radio. So imagine the American Express call center in Bangalore, someone setting up outside in a van with a base station so that all of the headsets route through their transceiver. I mean, if you've been to Bangalore or Pune, you know it's not hard to sit on the road and not be noticed. And you know, we can go back now. It's a whole new generation of basically phone freaking. This is DECT is effectively, outside of cellular, the default standards. Smart meters, there are other ICS experts here that operate at a very higher level than me, but I will tell you, with the smart meters are using ZB and Z-Wave. I'm waiting for a Robin Hood attack for someone to come by and reset all the power meters or reset all the water meters. The water meters are actually truly read off of the sensor, and someone could just drive through a city and just reset everyone's bill to zero. Again, we also see HVAC and other types of other types of industrial systems being used as pivot points and ingress points into targets. And I think this new set of protocols is going to make it even worse. And then hacking stuff. You know, I bought one of these, and I can't remember the name of it, but there was a kid's toy, wireless toy that was a firmware mod you can make on the processor that allows you to open. It's like the old garage stumblers, but revisited because it handles the new wireless protocols or new security protocols on kind of remote gate and remote door openers. And so again, more people hacking stuff wirelessly with no way to detect those attacks. Cars, I think people have seen cars ad nauseum. I think Valasek and Charlie Miller are probably tired of talking about car hacking. You know, hitting them over their Verizon wireless connection was only one way in. There was recently a disclosure where a kid simply modulated a laser pointer and was able to disable the LiDAR on a Mercedes-Benz and force the ABS brakes to brake. So the LiDAR on Mercedes now will automatically stop the vehicle if it thinks it's going to be an accident, and by jamming the laser simply with a laser pointer and some articulate modulation, he was able to stop a car. And so I think the multiple inputs, not only with the laser but the short range radar, all these are jammable. We've seen attacks in the UK attacking. I can sit in my parking lot in the US and make sure no one can lock their car doors if I'm transmitting on 350 megahertz and 433 megahertz. We saw this happen in the UK where a group of thieves was basically sitting outside a shopping mall and jamming on those frequencies so people would hit the button and think they locked their car and none of their cars were locked. And so I think we'll also be able to see people begin to, there are already tools out there where you can buy a capability to collect the key information, the key fob information, reflash your own key fob and drive off with the car. Finally, I truly, these are higher end government cellular interceptors that you can now make yourself by yourself for a couple $100 as opposed to for $500,000. I think we're going to begin to see these really show up in the wild. We're starting to see them here and there. We haven't seen a lot of them, but they will. There will be a Wi-Fi pineapple equivalent to this, over the next few years, where we'll see them show up in the wild, and we're going to need ways to detect things. Kind of in my last kind of note on privacy, this probably only makes sense to Americans, but going back to all this data being collected on ourselves, when it comes to free services on the internet like a Facebook or something, clearly you're the product. I think that in the case of a lot of these IoT devices, you are also the product, and we are giving up an immense amount of privacy by opting in. I personally think the solution is there definitely is a millennial issue. To riff on Chris Lovejoy's stats on millennials, I did a blog recently. About 70% of millennials willingly disregard their information security policy. So they read it, they're aware of it, and they break it anyway because they just don't care. And so you've got a different insider threat issue now. These devices are going to make themselves get themselves into the enterprise. And unless you're on Wi-Fi, there's no way to enforce a BYOD policy today because people have no visibility in the spectrum all the way down to marine VHF up to Globalstar satellite devices on the IoT. So I'm excited. I think we're at a golden age of hacking. I'm really glad I can be at the front of it and building something around it. But I think the next 10 years around RF hacking are going to be awesome. I think we're going to have some probably critical problems and major outages, but I think there's going to be a great opportunity for innovation and creativity. And I think people getting at the front end of IoT hacking are probably going to have the most fun because the fruit is easy and ripe for the picking. You know, hacking Windows 20 years ago was really easy. Getting a remote in Windows today is really, really hard. But to do so for the IoT today is fun. I think RF is the enabler. So that's it. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any Q&A.
Thank you very much, Chris. Any questions from the floor?
Yeah, excellent talk. Yeah, just to add, for example, in Russia, to monitor the pipelines, like you have to transmit data across the pipelines with like any radio signal or anything. So, and they know that you cannot trust that. So they actually, to monitor the pipeline, they actually hired humans which drive in the tracks in a certain area and just like physically monitor the pipeline to like exclude the sabotage. The second thing that actually the Barbie doll is not the worst thing which connected to the internet. 2 years ago, there was a talk at CCC exploiting sex toys which are operated remotely. Yeah, and yeah, and there was also a funny joke on the Twitter that very soon your TV set will be extorting you about what it's seen in your bedroom.
Yeah, no, yes, I'm familiar with some of those talks, but as you mentioned, our talks are recorded. And I think though in the oil and gas sector, there's a very interesting opportunity to secure those emitters and detect rogue emitters. And so, just as my high-level fix for maritime safety is put a sensor on a ship that detects a new emitter that came out of nowhere. On a pipeline scenario, if a new emitter shows up, a new emitter should not show up very often, and it should trigger an event. Just as if you're jamming a home alarm system. When you're jamming a home alarm system, you're going to show up as a new sensor for that alarm outside the house. And so that should be, it could be, maybe you added a guest house, but that should happen very rarely. And so the thesis of basically scanning the airspace, decoding the protocols like we did with TCP dump or Snoop or Wireshark, and then we're seeing this slowly, kind of protocol by protocol, but it's I think there needs to be some big moves. I like GNU Radio a lot. I think it's kind of becoming the de facto standard for manipulating RF data, and it's really improved quite a bit. But something else could come out there and be the snort or the nmap for the airspace.
Any other questions? Well, we certainly won't be looking at Cyber Barbie the same way again, or sex toys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.